It all began with an innocent lunch invitation, or so we thought. My brother-in-law, the man married to my sister, the father of their 2 children, reached out to my wife with a seemingly casual request. "Can we meet for lunch? There's something I need to talk to you about." At first, my wife was puzzled, but not overly concerned. She wondered if it was about my sister, perhaps some marital issue he needed a woman's perspective on. I, too, brushed it off, thinking it was odd but harmless. After all, we were a close-knit family, and it wasn't unusual for us to support each other through tough times. Little did we know, this lunch would unravel a chain of events that would shatter our family's trust and stability. The day of the lunch arrived, and my wife met him at a bustling cafe near her office. She arrived early, choosing a table by the window, her nerves slightly eased by the public setting. When he walked in, she immediately noticed something was off. He looked nervous, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an uneasy tension. They exchanged pleasantries, talking about work and the kids, but as soon as their food arrived, he took a deep breath and dove into the real reason he had asked her there. His words hit her like a thunderclap. "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you," he confessed, his voice trembling. He went on, pouring out his heart in a way that was both shocking and surreal. He told her she had always been the light in his life, that he had been holding these feelings in for years, and that he believed they were meant to be together. He even made grand promises, saying he would treat her like a queen if she were his. My wife sat there, stunned, unable to believe what she was hearing. This man, her brother-in-law, the one we had trusted implicitly, was confessing a love that had no place in our reality. The situation escalated quickly. My wife tried to interrupt, to tell him he was making a colossal mistake, but he kept talking, almost as if he had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his head. His words were laced with desperation, his eyes filled with a longing that made her skin crawl. She finally stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked out without a word. She was shaking as she called me, her voice breaking as she recounted the horrifying conversation. But the worst was yet to come. As she was on the phone with me, his texts started flooding in apologies at first, then pleas for her not to tell my sister. He claimed it was just infatuation, that he had misread signals, and that he thought she felt the same way. He even had the audacity to suggest that my wife had been flirting with him during a recent family gathering. The audacity of his delusion was staggering. He had twisted her friendly, playful nature into something it was never meant to be. This revelation was a devastating blow. The man we had welcomed into our family, the one we trusted to be a good husband and father, had been harboring a dangerous obsession for years. His confession wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was the culmination of a long, twisted fantasy that threatened to tear our family apart. The lunch that started as a simple meeting had turned into a nightmare, one that would leave us grappling with betrayal, anger, and the painful task of picking up the pieces. The moment my brother-in-law's confession spilled out into the open, the air in the cafe seemed to freeze. My wife, sitting across from him, felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. His words, "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you," echoed in our mind, each syllable more surreal than the last. She stared at him, her heart pounding, her mind racing to make sense of the absurdity unfolding before her. This wasn't just a casual admission. It was a full-blown declaration of love, complete with grand promises and a delusional belief that she felt the same way. The man she had known as her brother-in-law, the one who had always been the fun uncle to our kids, was now someone she barely recognized. Her first instinct was to shut him down. "This is a mistake," she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. But he wouldn't stop. He kept talking, his words tumbling out in a desperate, almost manic stream. He spoke of how he had watched her for years, how he had convinced himself that their playful banter and friendly teasing were signs of something deeper. My wife's stomach churned as she realized the depth of his obsession. This wasn't a fleeting crush. It was a calculated, years-long fixation that had festered in the shadows of our family gatherings. Unable to bear another second, she stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. The noise drew a few curious glances from nearby tables, but she didn't care. She grabbed her bag and walked out, her legs shaking with every step. The moment she was outside, she called me, her voice breaking as she recounted what had just happened. "He's lost his mind," she said, her words laced with disbelief and anger. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the mix of shock and fear that came with realizing someone you trusted had crossed a line you never imagined existed. As she spoke, her phone buzzed incessantly with texts from him, apologies, excuses, and desperate pleas for her not to tell my sister. Each notification felt like a violation, a reminder of the betrayal that had just unfolded. She was furious, not just at him, but at herself for not seeing the signs sooner. "How could I have been so blind?" she asked, her voice cracking. But the truth was, none of us had seen it coming. He had hidden his obsession behind a mask of normalcy, and now that mask had been ripped away, leaving us all to grapple with the fallout. After my wife's harrowing encounter with my brother-in-law, we knew we couldn't let his confession slide. The weight of his words, "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you," hung heavy in the air, a toxic cloud threatening to poison our family. We decided to confront him directly, to demand an explanation for his reckless betrayal. My wife, still shaken but determined, agreed to answer one of his frantic calls, putting them on speaker so I could hear every word. The moment he realized I was listening, his tone shifted from desperate to panicked. "Please, don't tell my wife," he begged, his voice cracking. He claimed it was just infatuation, a momentary lapse in judgment, but his words rang hollow. He even had the audacity to suggest that my wife had given him signals, that their playful interactions had led him to believe she felt the same way. My blood boiled as he tried to shift the blame, his delusional narrative painting my wife as the instigator. I cut him off, my voice cold and steady. "You've crossed a line," I said, my anger barely contained. He pleaded for secrecy, swearing on his children's lives that he had never acted on his feelings before. But the damage was done. His obsession had shattered the trust we had placed in him, and now we were left to pick up the pieces of a family on the brink of collapse. Just when we thought the situation couldn't get worse, my sister called late that night, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I need to tell you something," she said, her words heavy with dread. My heart sank as she explained that my brother-in-law had spun a twisted tale, claiming that my wife had been the one to initiate an affair. According to him, she had been flirting with him for months, and he'd only confessed his feelings because he felt guilty. The audacity of his lie was staggering. He had taken his own obsession and turned it into a weapon, trying to shift the blame onto my wife to save himself. I was furious. "That's not what happened," I told my sister, my voice sharp with frustration. I assured her we would come over immediately to set the record straight. My wife, pale and visibly shaken, gathered her things, her hands trembling as she prepared to face the chaos head-on. The drive to my sister's house felt endless, the silence in the car thick with tension. We both knew this confrontation would change everything. When we arrived, the scene was even more intense than I had imagined. My sister stood on the front porch, her arms crossed, her face a mask of controlled rage. My brother-in-law was there too, his usual confidence replaced by a hollow, defeated expression. He knew we had the evidence, the texts, the voicemails, the undeniable proof of his betrayal. My wife handed her phone to my sister without a word, and as my sister scrolled through the messages, her expression hardened. The truth was laid bare, and there was no escaping it. My brother-in-law's lies had unraveled, leaving him exposed and powerless. The confrontation was just beginning, but one thing was clear: the family we thought we knew would never be the same again. As the confrontation at my sister's house unfolded, the depth of my brother-in-law's obsession became horrifyingly clear. While my wife and I stood there, reeling from his lies and desperate pleas, my sister decided to dig deeper. She stormed into the house, her face a storm of fury and determination, and headed straight for his laptop. With trembling hands, she guessed his password on the third try. She was in. What she found next would send chills down all our spines. Hidden in a folder labeled innocuously were hundreds of photos of my wife, dating back years. These weren't casual family snapshots or group pictures. They were isolated shots, taken without her knowledge, often zoomed in and focused solely on her. My sister's face paled as she scrolled through them, her anger turning to a cold, creeping horror. One set of photos stood out, a collection from a couple's trip to the Caribbean years ago. My wife, feeling relaxed in the adults-only environment, had worn a bikini, something she rarely did. There were dozens of pictures of her in that bikini, each one taken secretly, without her consent. The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. It was a years-long calculated obsession. When my sister confronted him with the photos, my brother-in-law broke down completely. He admitted that his fixation had started the very first day he met my wife, back when my sister had introduced him to her friends. He described how he had been captivated by her smile, her laugh, the way she carried herself. Over time, his feelings had grown into something darker, more consuming. He confessed that he had been watching her, collecting these photos and nurturing his obsession in secret. His words were a chilling admission of how far he had fallen into his own delusions. The room fell silent as the weight of his confession settled over us. My wife, visibly shaken, gasped as she saw the photos for the first time. She had no idea he had been doing this, no inkling of the depth of his fixation. My sister, her face a mask of betrayal and disgust, turned to him and said, "This is beyond forgiveness." The man we had trusted as a husband, a father, and a brother-in-law had revealed a side of himself that was dark, disturbing, and utterly unrecognizable. The evidence was undeniable, and it was clear that this nightmare was far from over. The fallout from my brother-in-law's confession and the chilling discovery of his obsession left my sister with no choice but to take drastic action. The man she had married, the father of her children, had not only betrayed her trust, but it also revealed a dark, unsettling side of himself that she could no longer ignore. With a steely resolve, she made the painful decision to separate from him and begin the process of divorce. Her priority was clear: protecting their children from the toxic fallout of his actions. The evidence was damning. His texts, voicemails, and the cache of secret photos painted a clear picture of his instability. My sister wasted no time in contacting a lawyer to explore her options. She was determined to limit his access to their children, fearing that his obsessive behavior could have a detrimental impact on their well-being. The lawyer assured her that, given the documented evidence, she had a strong case for full custody. My brother-in-law, now a shadow of his former self, didn't even put up a fight. It was as if he knew he had lost everything: his marriage, his family, and the respect of those who had once trusted him. My sister moved through the house with a quiet determination, her focus entirely on her children's future. She spoke to a child psychologist to prepare for the inevitable questions and emotions they would face. Though the road ahead would be difficult, she was ready to be both mother and father to them, providing the stability and love they would need. As for my brother-in-law, he became a silent figure in the guest room, a man who had lost everything to his own delusions. The family we had once known was gone, replaced by a painful new reality that we would all have to navigate together. In the aftermath of the chaos, my wife and I were left grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. She felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, blaming herself for being too comfortable around my brother-in-law. "Maybe I gave him the wrong idea," she said one night, her voice trembling with regret. She replayed every interaction, every joke, every moment of playful banter, wondering if her friendly nature had been misinterpreted. I reassured her that none of this was her fault. She had done nothing wrong. The blame lay entirely with him and his twisted obsession. Despite her guilt, she and my sister managed to maintain their strong bond. Their friendship, forged over years of trust and mutual respect, remained intact, a small silver lining in the midst of the storm. As for us, my wife and I decided to face the crisis head-on, one step at a time. The betrayal had shaken us to our core, but we were determined not to let it destroy our marriage. We leaned on each other for support, talking through our fears and frustrations. The support from our family and friends was invaluable. They rallied around us, offering comfort and advice when we needed it most. My wife, though still haunted by the ordeal, began to heal slowly. She blocked my brother-in-law's number and avoided any contact with him, creating a necessary boundary to protect herself. The story ended not with a neat resolution, but with a family determined to pick up the pieces and shield the children from the fallout of my brother-in-law's betrayal. His shocking confession, "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you," had set off a chain reaction that left us all reeling. But in the face of such chaos, we knew we had to act quickly and decisively. My sister's decision to separate from him and pursue full custody was a painful but necessary step to protect her children. My wife and I, though deeply shaken, focused on rebuilding our own sense of security and trust. The support from our extended family and friends became a lifeline, helping us navigate the emotional wreckage. Looking back, I realized how crucial it was to confront the issue head-on. Had we hesitated or tried to sweep it under the rug, the damage could have been far worse. The evidence, his texts, voicemails, and the disturbing photos left no room for denial or delay. Acting swiftly allowed us to protect the ones we loved and begin the long process of healing. This ordeal taught me that in moments of crisis, hesitation can be as dangerous as the crisis itself. While the scars of this betrayal will linger, our family's resilience and unity give me hope that we will emerge stronger, more vigilant, and more committed to safeguarding the bonds that hold us together.